China's rich, Chinese are poor. Watch out, Australia. Slows down, you're with the rest of us.
The musician turned campaigner said it was short-sighted for Canberra to give up on its foreign aid commitments because building communities is the only way to stop those people getting on boats and coming to places like Australia. And Sir Bob Geldoff and David Jones joined me earlier today in Sydney prior to the event to promote the charity One Young World. And a warning, Sir Bob does use some strong language. Sir Bob Geldoff, David Jones, thank you both so much for being with Lateline this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
David Jones, your book, Who Cares Wins? It's basically about how nice businesses do better than nasty ones. Is there evidence for that?
I think we're seeing a huge amount of evidence, and one of the things I write about in the book is how I think we're entering headlong into what I call the age of damage, where what's actually happened is people have been empowered through social media and digital to hold businesses and leaders accountable, and if you don't behave in the right way anymore, they can now take you down and sanction you. And I think, a couple of years ago there were maybe one or two examples of this. You take BP probably as the poster child for a business that behaved in the wrong way, and record fine in history of American business, $4.5 billion, banned from any contracts with the US oil industry. That was a great example, but every single week now we see another example of it. Take Goldman Sachs with the employee who resigns, sends a letter, posts it, it goes completely viral, and within 24 hours $2 billion have come off Goldman Sachs market cap. You had American Apparel and Gap trying to push sales whilst people were stuck indoors through Hurricane Sandy, huge backlash through social media. So I fundamentally believe that in the future, the new price of doing well is doing good, and that if you don't set out to be socially responsible as a business, you won't be able to succeed.
Can you define for us exactly what your charity, One Young World, is trying to achieve?
Sure. What we basically said is, as we're going to say to our clients, you need to have a purpose beyond profit, that they would obviously turn around to us and say, yeah, well, what's yours? So what we basically said is, we think if we can give the brilliant young people of the world a platform to drive and affect positive change, that can be something that we can be incredibly proud of. But not only that, it can really be our purpose and really have a major impact in the world. So what we do is we bring together 1,300 young people every year from 183 countries, a very prestigious list of councillors, Sir Bob Geldoff, Bill Clinton, Kofi Annan, Desmond Tutu, Mohammed Yunus. But what we said is also, the world doesn't need another youth conference. What it needs is people to do things. And so we have over 375 tangible initiatives that have now come out of One Young World. We launched the One Young World Social Business Fund.
Well, tell us what one of those successes...
Everything from, Parker, who at the age of 16 became the youngest person in history to ski to the geographic North Pole, and on the way was taking samples to show how the polar caps are melting faster. We had the Haitian School Bag Project, where they created a way of getting basic schooling equipment into the hands of kids who've been displaced in post the earthquake in Haiti. One of the social businesses that we granted an award to is a business called Sort, and it's 3 girls in Singapore who've created a jewellery business that makes jewellery out of decommissioned landmines and guns, and then the proceeds go back to helping people who've been victims of those. So it's some really interesting and smart initiatives happening.
Either of you, the next question is too, the global efforts around climate change, for instance, which is seen as one of these big issues, it saw some of the most celebrated minds get together from around the world to promote the cause, but that hasn't managed to really change the minds that matter, the ones in the US and China, the big emitters. In the end, won't pure economics always trump altruism?
My answer to that would be that there are many, the fastest way of sorting this whole issue out is legislation. And actually, Bob and I first met, through Kofi Annan's Tick, Tick, Tick climate campaign. But if you look at all the major shifts that we've driven fast in the world, from wearing seatbelts to stopping smoking to banning CFCs, legislation has been the key thing. And I think that is the fastest way. And everything else, we can make progress. We can have big campaigns that drive and lobby. But, the Tick, Tick, Tick campaign we did, it was a big success on one level because it got 18 million climate allies. It was a complete failure on another because no one did anything in Copenhagen.
So, Bob, is it a bit like some of the campaigns you've run in the past, that it's one thing to get the momentum and to get people interested in an idea and awareness, but in the end it's always got to be the governments that follow through on making it change?
I think it always has to be. I mean, if you want change, you must engage with the agents of change. And whether we like it or not, the agents of change are elected representatives. Some people feel they don't want to go down that route, but it's imperative. With regard to the climate issue, this now is no longer a matter of debate. You may refute the science, but the science is empirically clear. And it's not something that can be solved on a national basis, which is probably why the French didn't go with it. It's not something that can be solved by Australians or even America or China on their own. In fact, even if China and America get together, it won't be resolved. So practically everything that David has talked about goes to the problem at the beginning of the 21st century, that the old model, the political paradigm of the 20th century, competition, can't pertain in an era of digital media, which implies globalization. The new paradigm must be compromise, consensus, cooperation. It must be, because the essential problem is that formal power still resides with the nation state, while the nation state at the exact same time is incapable of dealing with its problems, which by definition are international. Meanwhile, the political loyalties of the local electorate remain stubbornly local. So that's it. That's the nutshell, and that's the big problem. And going to his point about what's social business, it mirrors what I've been saying about politics. It's no longer acceptable that our generation every generation fails, and our generation has failed more spectacularly than any. And it's no longer acceptable.
At what in particular? Failed at what?
Look at the world. I mean, we're sitting pretty here in Australia, something you probably recognise but don't realise. But the carnage outside of Australia is immense. The carnage visited upon this world, upon incalculable millions of people by my generation, and the way they behaved in business and politics is incalculable. Ruined lives, lost homes.
You're talking about the developing
businesses.
world?
I'm talking about all the world, the United States, Cyprus, where people have just had 40% of their savings taken yesterday. Ireland, my country, the UK, all of it. The old world is locked in stasis. And the basis of it is that capitalism can only triumph over human value for a short term. A man is not a credit card. A country is not a credit rating.
So how do you explain the disaster of the Occupy movement, which was
I don't think it was a disaster. I think it was a fantastic thing.
But what did it achieve?
It achieved a lot. No. Buñuel said something fantastic. He said the artist can never hope to change anything. The most he can do is to tell those in authority that not everybody agrees with them. And I love the fact that the press, increasingly useless, as we saw the fantastic spectacle of billionaire press barons lecturing your freely elected representatives about freedom. The man who just set up the Shanghai Daily, crawling up the arse of the most authoritarian regime in the planet, who probably put onerous restrictions. This man, this Australian, lecturing your freely elected parliament on freedom. What a joke. These people have visited this upon themselves. And people like David are groping. You forgot to mention that he's serious, top-of-the-class businessman. He runs this giant thing. And all this has to change. It hasn't worked. It's not just a failure within the system. It is a failure of the system. It's a lack of recognition that we are in a whole other world. That world, when money met technology, it wrought massive disruption. Disruptive technologies that shut down my business, the record industry, the book industry, and increasingly the newspaper industries, which are increasingly redundant. If it destroyed outdated businesses, it also destroyed outmoded logics. We have to find a different way for this century.
I think back to the Occupy movement. I mean, on one level, what did they achieve? I mean, I think if you look today one of the biggest issues. It's all about, the haves and have-not, executive pay, shareholder revolts on executive pay, and Occupy played a really, really important role in that. I mean, I think, Occupy was a big success in getting awareness. They maybe didn't have a very clear ask, which could have made them more powerful, but without a doubt, they've helped fuel this environment, which is good for the world, about reining back in executive pay and particularly pay in the financial sector.
But also the fact that they didn't have an agenda. But the point is, but the failure of Occupy was that nobody could say what they wanted. They could say, it was just fuck off. Everything, just fuck off. It's crap. Brilliant. That's enough. We resist. We say no. What do you say no about? The lot. Everything. It's just not working. And it confounded people. And they parked their tents and they were very passive. They weren't aggressive. They weren't violent. And they just said no.
How important is the Millennium Development Goal of 0.7% of GDP or gross national income spent on foreign aid? Is that still an important goal?
It is, and I'm a bit exhausted now, but I woke up Brisbane, I think, my phone going bonkers, and the British government had fantastically met its commitment, its international commitment to 0.7 at a time of great economic stress. And again, it's the logic of predictive policy throughout governments, Labour, Tory coalition. So Blair promised he'd do it in 2005 at Gleneagles, Brown continued it and Cameron picked up on it. And we achieved it 2 years before it's mandated. There's no mandate, it's a UN mandate. We achieved it, which is why Australia's effort is less than fabulous, given that you are doing extremely well. It's your 21st year of continuous growth.
We're in fact the only developed country in the world that didn't go into recession in the last 4 years.
Yeah, and
we are now at
point. You have no excuse. Everybody else has an excuse.
We're at 0.35%.
Yeah.
And our aim by the deadline is only 0.5.
Yeah,
what do you make of that?
And there's also other anomalies, like taking 350 million out of the budget to spend on your own internal immigration problems. That's not overseas development, which is what ODA is. But let me put this in context. We've always argued that even if you just do it out of self-interest, this is a no-brainer. And the advantage to the UK of not just keeping to its political promises, of course, you can't build a school and 2 years later the kid turns up and says, oh, no teachers. Why? Because Australia didn't send its money. That's useless. You're not going to get development. The upside is that, of course, it works completely. That's the first thing. I'm not going to bore the audience with the whole facts of it. It does. But let's look at the self-interest. Quite rightly, I believe you spend the bulk of your money on your near neighbours in Asia. However, the fact is that as you get economic growth, people stop emigrating from their country, specifically to yours, because no one wants to leave their country. Right now, Australia is taking in thousands of young Irish kids, which is heartbreaking for us, but great for them, lucky for them, and frankly lucky for you. That wouldn't happen if Ireland's economy was stable, but it's not. It's ruined yet again by the people I talked about earlier, shysters, international gangsters and national ones. We could name them. Not a single one has gone to jail. It drives me nuts. But the point about ODA is that the leaders of Africa used to go to Brussels and Beijing. They now stop off at London first. Why is that important? Fastest growing continent, fastest growing middle class, fastest urbanising continent. The top 10 fastest growing economies in the world, the top 10, 7 are African. Australia needs to be involved in a far higher level. You have the same industries, extractives. You are the world experts, along with the Israelis, on dry irrigation farming. Whether we like it or not, we're going to Africa because the world is in a food crisis. It isn't going away. 60% of the remaining arable land of the planet is Africa. We're going there. Why does Britain benefit from this? Private capital investment into Africa, because it's welcomed, is 50 times that of Germany. The third largest economy in the world, the first economy in Europe. It's 4 times that of the United States, the largest economy in the world. And the benefit in jobs to the UK is absolutely enormous. Unilever, for example, we talked about earlier, a British company. If you put $1 into Unilever in an investment and you put it on the Sydney Stock Exchange, New York or London, you'd have returned $8 last year. If you put it into their local stock market in Africa, you would have returned 27.80 on the same dollar. To get into Africa is like being the first mover investor with Facebook. Australia should wise up.
We're in an election year, 5 months out. What's your message to our two political parties?
His message and my message are different. You're in a difficult position as an interviewer. You're asking him about One Young World, and you're asking me about ODA. And, it limits the sort of, here you get extravagant in your language, the war on poverty. But everything he talks about, and everything you talk about in your profession, climate change, nuclear proliferation, terrorism, all those things come from poverty. Come from the scourge of poverty. Poor people need to produce. They need to use the cheapest materials. They pump crap up into the air, to manufacture things at the lowest food chain of the economy. The Chinese are scrambling to get up into the higher reaches now to R&D and all that sort of stuff. Get rid of that necessity, and you begin to be able to compromise and mediate climate change. When people are mute, when they're disenfranchised, when they're beaten up and put upon, when they've no outlet, you pick up a stone, you pick up a stick, you pick up an AK-47, or you get on your phone, viz. South Africa. North Africa. When leaders fail to lead, the people will teach them to follow.
And I think that, for me, transparency, authenticity and speed are the rules of social media, but I think they're the new rules of leadership. And I think, we are not seeing too many leaders around the world who get that.
The key issue there is speed, because what everything requires now is the long term, and our electoral cycle doesn't allow for that. The 4-year basis, you are not, if Julia goes to the electorate or Tony Abbott goes to the electorate and says, look, this is where we need to be, it's a 20-year pop, do you agree with us or not? It's 20 years, but you've got to put up with us. And you know what, in 20 years there's going to be corruption. Once we're in power, it all begins to go pear-shaped. Are you prepared to put up with that? Honest to God, the implication of this little thing in your pocket, we haven't a clue what it means. Him and his cohorts, they're supposed to be doing this every day, but we've no understanding of the implication, just like we had no understanding of what the car and the phone meant in 1913. No understanding that it meant suburbs, which meant a difference of the cities, that people could stay at home. No understanding of the change of psychology, and the death of distance meant the death of trust, all those sort of things. Nothing. And we're groping towards it. So it's easy to turn on Tony Abbott or Julia Gillard or David Cameron. It's easy. You've got 4 years to resolve the GFC in your country. It's global. Hello? You're not going to resolve it in France by getting up and saying this, that and the other. The people who wrote the 20th century probably were Darwin, Freud and Marx. My auntie's 104. She's alive, And she said in 1913, nobody had a clue that the world was about to commit suicide. No one. A year later. We're 2013. Whoever the Darwin, Freud and Marx of the 21st century are, they've written it. Who are they? Where are they? Who's groping towards an understanding of a difference that business really hasn't grasped yet, so you see it floundering and falling apart. That politics haven't grasped yet, so you see them flounder and fall apart with their 4-year cycles. We live through an age of volatility and mistrust. It's an exciting age. We will talk about it in 300 years. It's exciting to be alive if the word austerity is no more than a technical thing to you as it is to me. But to millions of people, it's the wipeout of their lives. And I find that disgraceful. And we must find new modes of cooperation and thinking. We must. Hence, me working with these guys and seeing if there's a glimmer of something going on with younger people who begin to think in a different way. That's interesting.
And we have to leave it there. Thank you both so much for talking to us tonight.
Thank you.
Tonight we continue our look at life in Vladimir Putin's Russia. On the economic front, the country's vast mineral wealth is driving the growth of Russia's middle class. But when it comes to the issue of security, there are concerns about the rise in Islamist terrorism. In part 2 of our series, Moscow correspondent Norman Hamont meets the university rector, who's trying to rein in the spread of radical Islam, and a fitness entrepreneur who's catering to Russia's burgeoning middle class.
So begins another day at the office for one of Russia's